That mucus you keep clearing from your throat? Your doctor did not properly explain why it is there. Today, I will, and I want you to think about something before we go any further. You have been living with this for weeks, maybe months, possibly longer than you can clearly remember. You have cleared your throat so many times it has become automatic. At the breakfast table, mid-conversation, in the middle of the night when it wakes you up and you reach for the water on your nightstand. And every single morning, before you have even fully opened your eyes, it is already there waiting for you. You have told yourself it is allergies, or the cold weather, or simply what getting older feels like. Maybe someone even handed you a lozenge and sent you home. So you carry water everywhere now. You avoid certain foods. You have tried remedies your relatives suggested. And still, nothing has actually changed. Here is what I need you to understand right now. That mucus is not random. Your body does not produce persistent symptoms without a reason. Every time that thickness settles at the back of your throat, your body is communicating something specific to you. The problem is that nobody has taken the time to tell you what it is actually saying. That ends today, because in 30 years of clinical medicine, I have seen this particular symptom misunderstood and mismanaged more than almost any other in adults over 60. People get dismissed. They get handed generic advice, and the real cause, sitting quietly underneath everything, never gets identified. Today, I am going to walk you through the specific, research-supported reasons this is happening in your body and exactly what you can do about each one. My name is Dr. Albert, and I have been in clinical medicine for 30 years. Over that time, a significant part of my practice has focused on the health challenges that affect adults over 60 specifically, because what happens in your body at 65 is genuinely different from what happens at 35, and most health content on the internet is not written with that distinction in mind. Persistent throat mucus is one of the symptoms I hear about most often from patients in this age group, and it is also one of the most consistently mismanaged. Not because the causes are mysterious, but because the connection between what is happening inside and what the person is actually feeling in their throat is rarely made out loud, in plain language, with enough detail to be genuinely useful. That is what I am here to do today. Before we get into the causes, I want to ask you one specific question, and I want you to think about it honestly. Is your throat worse first thing in the morning, before you have eaten or drunk anything? Or does it build up and stay with you throughout the entire day? Drop morning or all day in the comments below. Your answer tells me something quite important about what is driving this in your body, and I will explain why as we go through each cause. Here is something that changes the entire way you should think about this. Your body is supposed to produce mucus. Every single day, around the clock, your airways are coated and protected by a thin, fluid layer of mucus that traps bacteria, dust particles, and viruses before they reach deeper into your lungs. It keeps the delicate lining of your throat moist. Without it, your airways would crack and become vulnerable to every pathogen you encounter. Mucus is not the enemy. The problem is what happens to mucus as the body ages. Your airways are lined with millions of microscopic hair-like structures called cilia. These tiny structures beat rhythmically, sweeping mucus upward and outward, keeping it thin, fluid, and constantly moving. In a younger adult, this clearance system is fast and efficient. Mucus is produced, swept away, and you never notice it. But research has confirmed that as we age, these cilia slow down. They beat less frequently and with less force. Studies show that mucus clearance rates decline significantly after 60, which means that mucus, which would have been gone in moments, now pools and accumulates, sometimes for hours. And this matters deeply because it means any factor pushing your body toward excess mucus production hits harder and lasts longer in your body than it would have 20 years ago. That is the foundation. And it is why the causes I am about to walk you through produce such persistent, bothersome symptoms in people your age specifically. Think of your throat lining like a freshly painted wall. When it is healthy and intact, things slide off it easily. But the moment that surface gets irritated, inflamed, or dried out, it becomes sticky, and your body responds to a sticky, irritated surface the same way every single time. It sends mucus, more mucus, thicker mucus, faster mucus. Because mucus is your body's first line of defense, and its instinct is to protect whatever tissue is under threat. The problem is that protective response does not turn itself off. As long as the underlying trigger is present, the mucus keeps coming. And because the cilia clearing that mucus are working more slowly than they used to, the accumulation builds up in ways you feel constantly, at the back of your throat, in your voice, in your sleep, in your mornings. Now let us talk about what those triggers actually are, because this is where most conversations stop being vague and start being genuinely useful. The first cause is the one I see missed most often in clinic, and it is the one that surprises patients the most when it finally gets identified. It is called laryngopharyngeal reflux, and I want to explain it carefully because most people have never heard of it, and yet it is likely one of the most common reasons adults over 60 deal with persistent throat mucus. Most people know heartburn, that burning chest sensation after a heavy meal, classic acid reflux. But there is a version of this condition that produces no heartburn whatsoever. No chest discomfort, no obvious digestive complaint, just a throat that will not clear. Here is what happens. Between your esophagus and your stomach, there is a muscular valve whose only job is to stay firmly closed after you eat, keeping stomach acid exactly where it belongs. As we age, this valve gradually loses its tone, much like a spring that has been compressed too many times and no longer snaps back the way it once did. When that valve does not seal properly, acid travels upward, not just into the esophagus, but all the way into the throat, the voice box, and sometimes even the nasal passages. Now here is the critical point. Your esophagus has some protective lining against acid. Your throat tissue does not. Even the smallest trace of acid reaching your throat triggers an immediate defense response. Your body floods the area with thick protective mucus. This makes perfect biological sense. The problem is when this is happening quietly every night while you sleep, you wake up every single morning with that familiar heaviness you cannot explain. No heartburn, no stomach pain, just mucus. Research published in ENT clinical literature shows that up to 50% of people with this condition report no heartburn at all, just chronic throat clearing, a rougher voice in the mornings, and mucus that appears the moment they wake up and often improves slightly as the day progresses. Ask yourself honestly, is your throat significantly worse before you have eaten anything in the morning? Does it improve a little after you have been up for an hour or two? Does bending forward, tying your shoes, or lying down make it feel worse? Does your voice sound different or rougher when you first speak in the morning? These are the quiet fingerprints of silent reflux, and I will give you specific steps for this in the action plan. One additional detail worth your attention. If you take anti-inflammatory medications regularly for joint pain, medications like ibuprofen or naproxen, peer-reviewed research has established that this class of drugs reduces the stomach lining's natural protective barrier, making silent reflux significantly more likely to occur and harder to resolve. If you take these medications and your throat has been chronically unsettled, bring that specific combination to your doctor's attention. The second cause arrives quietly, and that quietness is exactly why it so often goes unrecognized for months or years. When most people imagine sinus trouble, they picture something dramatic: severe facial pressure, throbbing headache, nasal passages completely blocked. But in many adults over 60, chronic sinus inflammation presents almost invisibly. Breathing feels mostly acceptable. There is no dramatic headache, and yet the sinuses, mildly irritated and slightly swollen, are continuously draining thin mucus down the back of the throat all day long. This is called postnasal drip, and it is extraordinarily common in this age group. The frustrating part is that many people dealing with this have been taking over-the-counter antihistamines for months, reasoning it must be seasonal allergies. And the reason that approach consistently disappoints is this: antihistamines dry mucus temporarily, but they do absolutely nothing for the underlying inflammation inside the sinuses that is causing the overproduction. And dried, thickened mucus stuck at the back of your throat is frequently more uncomfortable than the original problem. The intervention with the strongest and most consistent research support is remarkably simple and inexpensive. Daily nasal rinsing using a warm saline solution. Clinical reviews have confirmed that high-volume saline irrigation physically removes inflammatory mucus from the sinus passages, reduces mucosal swelling, and crucially supports the natural ciliary clearance function we talked about earlier, the very system that slows with age. The word that determines whether this works or not is consistency. 1 or 2 uses gives temporary mild relief. Daily practice over 2 to 3 weeks produces the kind of cumulative improvement that actually changes how you feel. If this is giving you a clearer picture of your own health than you have had in a while, subscribe to this channel. My goal is straightforward. I want adults over 60 to have access to medically grounded, plainly explained health information that actually respects your intelligence and your experience. The third cause is where I see the most visible surprise on patients' faces in the consultation room, because it never occurs to most people to question the medications they have been taking faithfully for months or years. There is a class of blood pressure medications called ACE inhibitors, angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors. They are prescribed extremely commonly. They work well for blood pressure control, and most people tolerate them without issue. But they carry a documented class-wide side effect that is well established in the medical literature. They allow a substance called bradykinin to accumulate in the body, and in a meaningful proportion of patients, this accumulation produces persistent throat irritation and an ongoing, unrelenting need to clear the throat. This is not an allergy. This is not something going wrong with your body. It is simply how the medication functions, and your throat happens to be sensitive to that effect. Research suggests this side effect occurs in somewhere between 5 and 20% of users. And here is the detail that causes it to be missed so consistently. The side effect can take weeks or even months to develop after you begin the medication. So if you started a blood pressure pill 8 or 9 months ago and your throat symptoms appeared 6 months ago, your mind simply does not connect those two events. But that exact timing pattern is precisely what the clinical research describes. A large-scale study involving more than 27,000 patients found that adults over 65 had a 53% higher likelihood of experiencing this throat side effect compared to younger users. That number is specific to this audience, and it matters. If you take a blood pressure medication and are unsure whether it belongs to this class, your pharmacist can tell you within 1 minute. And there are alternative medication categories, specifically ARBs, angiotensin receptor blockers, that control blood pressure equally well and do not carry this specific throat side effect. That conversation with your prescribing doctor is absolutely worth initiating. The fourth cause is one that sounds almost too simple when I say it out loud, but the physiology behind it is more important than most people realize. Dehydration. Not dramatic, obvious dehydration where you feel parched and dizzy. Chronic, mild dehydration, the kind you barely notice, sustained day after day. Your mucus is primarily water. Its consistency, whether it flows freely and gets cleared efficiently, or whether it sits thick and sticky and impossible to move, depends directly on how hydrated the tissue around it is. Picture honey at room temperature versus honey that has been warmed slightly. Same substance, completely different behavior. Your mucus operates in exactly the same way. Here is the aging-specific detail that makes this more than a simple instruction to drink more water. Research has established clearly that the thirst mechanism becomes significantly less reliable as we age. A younger adult begins to feel thirsty well before any meaningful dehydration sets in. In older adults, that early warning signal is blunted. You can be dehydrated enough to noticeably affect your mucus consistency without feeling particularly thirsty at all. You can spend entire days mildly underhydrated, never triggering a strong sense of thirst, and never realizing that this is why your mucus is persistently thick and uncomfortable. Waiting for thirst to prompt you to drink means you are always working behind your body's actual needs. A practical target referenced across clinical nutrition guidelines is roughly 30 milliliters of fluid per kilogram of body weight per day from all sources, including water, herbal teas, soups, and water-rich foods. But the behavioral key is intentional, steady intake spread across the entire day, not a large amount consumed late in the evening when you remember you have not drunk enough. The fifth cause rarely comes up in conversations about throat mucus, and I believe that is a significant gap. Because for a meaningful number of older adults dealing with this persistently, the root of the problem is not in the throat, not in the sinuses, and not even in the stomach. It is in the gut. Your digestive system and your respiratory system share regulatory pathways through both the immune system and the nervous system. The health of your gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in your intestines, directly influences how reactive and how inflamed your upper airways are. When the balance of this microbiome is disrupted, a state researchers call dysbiosis, it can activate immune responses that drive excess mucus production in the airways. Not because anything is structurally wrong with your throat, but because your gut is sending inflammatory signals and your respiratory system is responding to them. This connection, sometimes described as the gut-lung axis, is an active area of clinical research. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have confirmed that gut microbiome disruption can promote airway inflammation and mucus overproduction. What disrupts the gut microbiome in older adults? A diet low in fiber and fermented foods, repeated antibiotic use over the years, chronic low-grade stress, high sugar intake. These are not unusual factors. They describe the daily reality of a very large number of people in this age group. You cannot clear a gut-driven airway response with a lozenge, but you can begin shifting it through consistent daily choices, and I will walk you through that in the action plan. I want to tell you about a patient of mine. I will call him Gerald. He was 71 years old when he first came to see me, a retired civil engineer who prided himself on being methodical and thorough about everything in his life. But he had been living with persistent throat mucus for nearly 2 years, and he had approached it the same way he approached every problem, systematically. He had tried 6 different over-the-counter remedies. He kept a log of which foods made it worse. He had eliminated dairy entirely for 3 months, which he was not happy about because he loved his morning yogurt. Nothing had made a meaningful difference. When we sat down together and I went through his full history carefully, 2 things stood out immediately. He had been taking a blood pressure medication for about 2.5 years, an AC inhibitor, and when we looked at the timeline of when his throat symptoms had begun, they had appeared somewhere around 8 months after he started that medication. He had never connected the two. Why would he? His doctor had not mentioned it. He had no chest pain, no obvious reflux, nothing pointing toward his stomach or his medication. The second thing I noticed was that he had been eating dinner late, usually around 8 in the evening, then reading in his recliner and falling asleep in the chair before going to bed. His stomach was still active when he was nearly horizontal, and his throat was paying the price every single night while he slept. We spoke with his prescribing physician, who agreed to trial a switch to an ARB class medication. We adjusted his evening meal timing, and I asked him, please start eating his yogurt again, because the live cultures were actually something I wanted him to have. Within 6 weeks, Gerald told me his throat felt quieter in the morning than it had in 2 years. Not completely resolved, because we still had some work to do on the reflux side of things, but noticeably, meaningfully better. And he had stopped carrying lozenges in every jacket pocket. Gerald's story is not unique. It is a version of what I have seen many times. The cause is findable. The solution is manageable. It simply requires someone to take the symptoms seriously enough to look for it properly. Here is what you can begin doing today, tonight, and this week. Tonight, stop eating at least 3 full hours before you lie down to sleep. This is one of the most consistently supported behavioral changes for reducing nighttime silent reflux. When you eat and then recline shortly afterward, your stomach is still processing food, and that valve we discussed is under the most pressure. 3 hours of upright time after your last meal makes a measurable difference. Also tonight, elevate the head end of your bed slightly, not by adding extra pillows under your head, which only bends your neck and does nothing for acid. Use a firm wedge under the mattress or place something stable under the top legs of the bed frame. Even a modest incline uses gravity to reduce how much acid can travel upward toward your throat while you sleep. Tomorrow morning, before coffee and before breakfast, drink 1 to 2 glasses of plain warm water. This begins rehydrating your body after overnight fasting and helps thin the mucus that is accumulated while you slept, making the morning significantly less heavy. It is one of the simplest, most consistently reported changes people notice. This week, get a nasal rinsing device from your pharmacy, a neti pot or a squeeze bottle. Use water that has been boiled and allowed to cool to a comfortable warm temperature. Add a small pinch of plain salt. Use it once daily in the morning and commit to 2 full weeks before you evaluate whether it is helping. Consistency is what separates people who say it worked from people who say it did not. Make an appointment to specifically review your medication list in relation to your throat symptoms. Write down a timeline before you go. When did the throat symptoms start? When did you last begin or change a medication? Bring that written chronology. If you take a blood pressure medication, ask directly whether it is an ACE inhibitor and whether trialing an ARB would be appropriate for your situation. Add 1 small daily serving of a fermented food, plain yogurt with live cultures, kefir, a portion of kimchi, or sauerkraut. These foods begin supporting gut microbiome diversity in ways that research connects to reduced airway inflammation over time. This is not an overnight fix. It is a long-term shift in your baseline, and those are the changes that actually stick. Set hydration reminders on your phone or keep water visible and accessible in every room you spend time in. Do not wait for thirst to tell you to drink. And a word on home remedies, because I know you have tried some of them. Honey is genuinely soothing for irritated throat tissue and is not harmful. It does not address any of the root causes we discussed today, but if it brings temporary comfort, there is no reason to stop. As for dairy, the science does not support the idea that it creates mucus, but some individuals notice a sensation of increased thickness in existing mucus after dairy. A 2 to 3 week trial reduction is reasonable if you notice a consistent pattern. Apple cider vinegar, popular as it is online, is something I would caution anyone with silent reflux to approach very carefully. Introducing additional acid when your throat is already being irritated by acid is not a logical direction, and I have seen it make things worse. Here is what I want you to carry away from today. That persistent mucus at the back of your throat has a reason, possibly more than one reason working together at the same time. Silent reflux happening quietly every night without a single symptom of heartburn to warn you. Postnasal drip from low-level chronic sinus inflammation that never announces itself dramatically. Medication-related throat irritation from a blood pressure pill you have been taking faithfully for months with no idea it could be a factor. Chronic mild dehydration that never triggers obvious thirst but keeps your mucus thick and immovable day after day. And gut microbiome disruption sending quiet inflammatory signals your airways are responding to. Not one of these requires you to simply accept a life of constant throat clearing. Each one has a practical, evidence-grounded response. And none of the first steps require a specialist referral or a prescription. They require knowledge, consistency, and a decision to treat your body's signals as worth responding to, rather than something to manage around. If anyone has ever told you that this is simply what getting older feels like, I hope today gave you a different and more accurate picture. You are not just aging. You are dealing with specific, identifiable, addressable physiology, and you deserve to know that. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 5 causes surprised you the most? And how long have you been quietly living with this? Leave your answer in the comments below. I read every one, and I mean that genuinely. If this video gave you something useful today, share it with one person in your life who has been dealing with the same thing. That one share costs you nothing and could genuinely change how that person understands what is happening in their own body. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell because I have a video coming very soon on how chronic inflammation quietly drives some of the most common and frustrating health complaints I hear from adults in this age group, including ones that seem completely unrelated on the surface. You will not want to miss it. Take good care of yourself.